more and more the governments and the regulators are involved right now in trying to push the sustainability agenda. And we're seeing, and I'm sure Mary will talk more about this, but we're seeing a lot of these green taxes coming out, either to encourage or discourage carbon emissions. And so the tax professionals do need to understand them, because there's some strategies, there's some cost savings that you could get out of this as well, or, make sure that you're compliant. So I think there is a little bit of hand in hand, but it's been an interesting role to have right now, and actually seeing how much ESG is actually becoming a popular topic within the organization and just around, I think.
Thank you for listening to the podcast thus far. 2024, big year ahead. The one favor I would ask, if you're enjoying what you're listening to, is to press the follow and subscribe button on whatever media platform you listen to us, as it helps us grow our network and grow the podcast. So thank you, and enjoy the podcast today.
Welcome to another episode of the Alchemy Uncensored podcast. My name is Pooja, and I specialize in accounting and tax roles here at Alchemy Search. As we know, tax is a hot topic with the introduction of corporate income tax in the UAE, but there is another buzzword acronym that we are hearing more and more of in this market, and that is ESG. ESG stands for Environmental, Social and Governance. It refers to a set of criteria used by investors and other stakeholders to evaluate a company's performance and sustainability practices beyond just financial metrics. There is a large interplay between tax and ESG. Governments may offer tax incentives or credits to encourage companies to invest in ESG initiatives such as renewable energy projects, energy efficiency improvements, or sustainable practices. Increasingly, there is a trend towards greater transparency and disclosure of ESG-related information by companies. Tax authorities may require companies to report on their environmental impact, social responsibility efforts, and governance practices as part of their tax filing. Stakeholders, including investors, customers, and regulators, are increasingly scrutinizing companies' tax practices in the context of their broader ESG commitments. Tax planning should align with the company's ESG goals to mitigate these risks and enhance trust and credibility. Overall, the integration of tax and ESG considerations require a holistic approach that considers both financial and non-financial factors to drive sustainable value creation and mitigate risks in an evolving regulatory and stakeholder landscape. Today's guests are experts in this field, and I'm excited to have them on this episode. Mary O'Leary is a tax policy director at EY MENA and heads up sustainability as it relates to the tax function. Prior, Mary worked in tax technology and spent 6 years at the OECD. Seema Sharma has worked with Network International for nearly 8 years as their global head of tax and has recently taken on an additional role of being their global head of ESG. She has experience of working with various tax regimes through her tax consulting experience. So thanks, Mary and Seema, for joining us on the podcast. It's really nice to have you here. So we're hearing a lot about ESG and sustainability, I feel, in the market these days. So I thought, who better to have than you guys who are experts in this field. I just wanted to understand a bit more about your backgrounds and the work you're currently doing in this space. So Seema, congratulations. You've recently added a new hat to your work, which is head of ESG at Network International. So how did this come about? Did you put your hand up for this role, or were you a natural selection? Does it kind of go hand in hand with tax? Maybe you can give us a bit more of your, how it all came about.
Yeah, thanks, Pooja. Thank you for having us. I think it's a great opportunity to be able to talk about sustainability, etc. And I think I had that interest in sustainability, but we had someone there before. And then when that person left, I was asked, if it's something that I would be interested in. And since I had some interest, and given the fact that I was really already looking at some of the aspects of ESG, like the social side, being involved in the women initiatives within network or outside, and then the governance side of it, like there's a lot of that within tax. It's important to have good governance, have those processes and controls in place, which naturally goes in with tax. So I think it just worked out well, that it was a good fit, and I enjoyed it as well. Whether it really goes hand in hand, I don't think there's a lot of people out there that are doing both, as a head of tax and a head of ESG. But definitely going forward, I don't think tax people can not be involved in some of the ESG factors, be it, either from the data set that needs to be fed into ESG, or, more and more the governments and the regulators are involved right now in trying to push the sustainability agenda. And we're seeing, and I'm sure Mary will talk more about this, but we're seeing a lot of these green taxes coming out. Either to encourage or discourage carbon emissions. And so the tax professionals do need to understand them, because there's some strategies, there's some cost savings that you could get out of this as well, or, make sure that you're compliant. So I think there is a little bit of hand in hand, but it's been an interesting role to have right now, and actually seeing how much ESG is actually becoming a popular topic within the organization and just around, I think.
That's really interesting. So do you think in the future of hiring tax professionals, if you have two tax profiles in front of you, would you like the fact that somebody has an ESG, understanding or has some background in ESG? Would that contribute a lot to the role in the future? Maybe not right now, but do you think they should be bringing these skill sets to the table as a head of tax when you're looking to hire in your teams? Do you think you would be looking for such profiles?
Probably not something in the near future, but I think definitely going forward it will become a good to have for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Mary, so you are working at EY, and you've been involved in a lot of policy work for quite a lot of your career background, working from the OECD and doing a lot of policy work now at EY. So yeah, how did you get into this role at EY? I think, when we spoke previously, you mentioned that it was something you put your hand up for. So maybe you can explain or share, how you got to your role at Director at EY.
Of course. Thanks for having me here, Pooja. I echo Seema's sentiments in that, and in particular, in bringing together a little bit more the two concepts of tax and sustainability. So I guess my journey, I'm with EY about 2.5 years now. So I started with the firm at the start of 2022. And at that point, the world was emerging from COVID. So this had been the largest change culturally, socially, economically that the world had seen. And really what was emerging as a light to try and get us through the transition and give us hope was actually ESG, and looking at sustainability and really embracing it as an opportunity. I had seen this from my time in Europe, and when I arrived, it was still quite a nascent trend, I would say, in the region. I think it's accelerated massively. COP28 being in region was obviously very instrumental in that. And within EY globally, sustainability has always been one of our core fields of play. So I really tried to drum up enthusiasm. I'm very passionate about the topic personally and professionally. And I started working with our sustainability market leader for tax, Alkesh Joshi, in really trying to drive this. And I think what was very important for us, I think globally everyone embraces the topic, but really to be able to break it down for what it means for tax and finance professionals. So I think that was the part that was really integral in me being able to get support both internally and also with the market around the topic. And I guess the key message really is you want to be on board this topic now before it becomes very regulated, very mainstream, and then you're left behind. And that seems to be the main message. And that is definitely driving change with what we're seeing.
So have you seen quite a lot of change in the last 2 years from when you started this role to where we're at now? You have seen a change in the mindset in, how it's taken on board by your stakeholders?
I would say massively.
Okay.
I would say definitely internally within the firm. So from a global perspective, it's always been there. But within the Middle East, North Africa firm where I sit, I think there's been huge uptake in interest. We run an awful lot of internal awareness programs, upskilling, and definitely the younger generation love this topic. And it's so welcoming to see this sort of passion around it. In terms of our client base, so talking to tax and finance professionals, we're also starting to see a lot of work around this. So when you say, what exactly does it mean? So for example, as Seema already alluded to, there's an ever-growing green tax landscape. So maybe at this stage, it's a little bit immature. I do foresee a lot of green taxes, such as carbon tax, energy tax, even lifestyle taxes like sugar tax, being applied in the coming years here. But normally the brighter side of the story, of course, is the incentives. So there's real money on the table. All you have to look at is the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States, the EU Green Deal, massive amounts of green incentives. So if you're applying some form of green investment, why not try and equally get some cash from government for that? And that seems to really be moving the needle in what we're seeing.
And typically, what kind of stakeholders are you working with from your client point of view? So are you working with CFOs who are taking on this initiative? Who is driving the sustainability work from your client point of view?
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. I've definitely seen a change in the direction of travel. So when I got into this space about 2.5 years ago, I would say still there was maybe an ESG officer at best. A lot of companies didn't have that defined role, and often they were a bit disjointed. They would be putting together an annual ESG report. Now I think it is much more of a multi-stakeholder, multifunctional initiative, which is great. I think I really welcome that, and I think it functions a lot better. And I think it's become quite circular. So where the tax team, the finance team, procurement, marketing, and many other functions need to feed into, be it an ESG report or an ESG strategy, then likewise, they need to bring these concepts into their own strategies and incorporate it into how they make business decisions.
Okay. So Seema, you mentioned that ESG was already looked at prior to you taking on this new role within Network International. So can you share what kind of work you're doing in your new role and, where Network International stand in terms of their ESG standpoint?
If we take a step back, I think a lot of the need to have an ESG person sort of came about when we got listed. There was a requirement from a UK standpoint, meeting the TCFD rules, etc., all the fun stuff, and so in many ways the role was sort of created from the disclosure regulatory requirements. But I think as we moved along, people did start, and the board especially also saw the benefits of actually investing in this role, in terms of, and I just don't think you can get away from it right now. It really is on everyone's agenda. It forms part of your, like you said, the business strategy, your financial strategy. It's what your customers want. It's what your employees want. So if you want to have good talent, you have to make sure that you are actually developing and incorporating a lot of these ESG initiatives. And that was like the wider sort of agenda that the company tries to lead, that let's actually see what more can we do. And plus I think the personal requirement too, everybody wants to live in a socially and environmentally friendly environment, and you want to leave behind a good environment for your kids. So it's a very human type role in some ways, as well as regulatory requirements. We've actually incorporated ESG into many things. So our RFP, for example, actually has a weighting for ESG as well.
Okay.
So that's really how seriously we are taking it within Network International.
It's It's really good. So yeah, but what started off as a more compliance and regulatory purpose, it's now evolved into the whole, seeing it as a value creation position. And of course, living in, 2024, we want to live in a more sustainable and have a sustainable future. So companies are now taking this on board and implementing it into their strategy, which is really, really good. So Mary, could you share, if you can, what kind of work you've been doing recently? I see on LinkedIn that you've been traveling quite a bit in your role. You've been to Saudi Arabia, you've been to Egypt. So yeah, can you share what's happening in the Middle East in general when it comes to sustainability?
Of course, yeah, I'd love to. I would say the last 6 months have really been the Tax and Sustainability Roadshow. And it's really been great to see all governments across the Middle East, in particular in the Gulf, really embracing this. So COP28, which was the last climate conference of the parties, met in Dubai in November. It was the second global stock take, and generally the outcome was not positive. So what this means now is that governments have to go back to the drawing board in terms of their NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and determine what sort of plans and strategies they're going to put in place in order for us globally, because of course climate and carbon is a global problem. How are we going to achieve things like the net zero by 2050, and of course the overarching goal, which is to limit global warming by 2 degrees, ideally 1.5 by the end of this century. So the next global stock take, so NDC 3.0, it's been termed, will be at Brazil, at COP30. And already, that seems like a long time away. It's really not. It's 19 months. And governments are very much back at the drawing board in determining sectorally. So for example, I think quite an obvious one would be the energy sector. What is the energy sector to do in order to achieve that net zero target, and really giving them pathways and guidance and support. So I'm very privileged to sit in a policy role. So I dialogue and interact a lot with government. And I would say in the fiscal tax space, green taxes will definitely be an instrument that is used to move the needle. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they largely influence consumer behaviour and get consumers to rethink their choices and think about maybe more sustainable products and practices like renewables, for example. And of course, then there's also the incentive piece as well. I would say when I'm dealing with the private sector, so with companies, a piece of work that has become extremely popular for the tax and finance function is what's called a green tax impact assessment. Okay. So you would map out all of the different verticals of your business, map out the different markets that they traverse. And then on top of that, we would do a deep dive analysis as the different types of green taxes you're potentially liable for, the kind of compliance and administrative journey around complying with those, but also potentially the incentives you might benefit from. So I would say that is a very good starting point, because it gives you a clear view of a global landscape that is so dynamic. There's new taxes and incentives being announced, and we actually have a tool called the Green Tax Tracker that does a weekly horizon scan in order for us to keep on top of all of those. So I would say knowing where you are right now, it's also quite good sometimes to know the baseline. And I guess consultancy firms have the benefit of having quite a lot of data on your peers and being able to give you a bit of an indicator as to where you are. And of course, knowing where you are then paths your future journey and strategy as well when we're talking about tax and tax compliance. So I would say they are some of the actions, projects that I'm seeing in region at the moment.
How are you finding the Middle East in particular? Is there any green taxes around?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say the landscape has changed so much in the 2.5 years I have been in this. And really at the government level, I think first ESG was viewed as either a nice to have or a bit of a burden. Now it's completely changed. It's done a 180-degree shift in recognizing the opportunity. So for example, where we have lots of industries that are extremely fossil fuel dependent, inevitably the writing is on the wall for the sell-by date for the fossil fuel industry. So, of course, governments are now looking at alternatives and how you would deploy all of those people, resources, etc., into things like renewables. Green hydrogen is a massive to-be industry, and Middle East is really paving the way around that, which is such a positive sign. So I just think the rate of change and acceleration is huge in this region. There's so much energy and positivity and can-do attitude behind it. And I love being part of the movement in the Middle East, to be honest.
I think it's what you're doing is really exciting. Like your work is literally having an impact on the world, like, the future. And you're having a part in creating this, being in a policy role. It hasn't been around, and you're there fighting for these, things to be implemented, what's really key for our future. So yeah, that's really amazing. Can you share how many people are involved in this from a MENA point of view at EY? Do you have a big team with you working on this?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because as I was saying to Seema earlier, it's very much a cross-service line offering. So sustainability isn't something that sits uniquely within tax. It doesn't sit uniquely within assurance or consulting. It's really cross-functional. So that, even for my own personal career journey, has been really incredible in giving me insight into other service lines in the firm, in understanding the kind of projects, the kind of expertise that they bring. So, for example, in our assurance service line, where a lot of the baseline CO2, scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions are done, we have a huge team of engineers. And I sit in meetings and conversations that I would never have had before as a traditional tax person. And that has been amazing in terms of my own learning and growth. But I would say we definitely have in the hundreds between tax, assurance and consulting, and doing all sorts of projects related to achieving sustainability goals.
That's really cool. So Seema, are there any challenges companies face when they're considering ESG?
The biggest challenge we have is getting the data or actually collating it, really. It's a lot of the things we probably already have in place. For example, for scope 1 or 2, having those electricity bills and data like that is already there. But just, having a formal process of being able to collect that every month that nobody really would have done in the past. Number of women in the organization, your HR tends to have that sort of data as well, and other areas. And then I think the other biggest challenge is just getting everyone to take ESG seriously, with everybody having so much on their plate. To add to another data request is not only within the ESG framework. I think it's a challenge in any area, even if you're trying to get data for tax. But I think with ESG in particular, since it's not your traditional sort of functions, it still requires a lot of education internally in terms of, why do you need this? Okay, well, we have it, but we only have it in this way. So trying to tell them, actually, I want it cut and diced into this sort of format is what really becomes a bit challenging. And so education and making sure that you are going and speaking to the right stakeholders is one of the key things to identify.
Is it mandatory to report on these different parts of ESG, or are some mandatory and some not mandatory right now?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. Some actually are mandatory. It also depends where you are and what regulations you're following. So, for example, under the UK rules, you have to report a certain amount of ESG KPIs, whereas others we are increasingly seeing, because we're trying to increase our scope 3 data collection as well. So having to speak to our suppliers, I think that's where the challenge is, and looking at our complete value chain. Getting that data is always a little bit harder, but some of it is mandatory. And I think that's the angle where you can go and get that data. But the ones that are not mandatory, those really you have to have some way of, asking, can you please provide us with this information? And there's a lot of good education that needs to be done. For example, to the business team, I think you have to educate them that we want you to go and try and market into these financial inclusive sort of countries, because it not only will help you from a business standpoint, but it's also promoting our ESG angle. And I think Network has one sort of an advantage in terms of the kind of service that we provide. We're taking opportunities to a lot of these African countries where in the past, a lot of the businesses have only operated under cash, but now we're making it possible for them to be able to take payments through plastic and, online, etc. And these are, all helping to their revenue and the economy. So that's a contribution that Network has in all the jurisdictions that we go to. And if there are business opportunities, for example, where, it's a more developed country or a less developed country, we will try and see if we can promote the business into the lesser developed country to try and play a role in that economy and try and contribute to it as well.
I think that's investors are not just looking at financial metrics anymore. They're looking at the non-financial and what the companies are actually doing in terms of all these other aspects, having a social conscious. And so the fact that, companies are now taking this on board, it's not just, like I said before, for compliance reasons. It's, it's being viewed by customers, by investors. It's important. It's integral now to your reporting, what you're doing as a whole, not just your bottom line. Mary, can you share the short-term or medium-term developments you can foresee in this area?
Yeah, of course. I think at the governmental policy level, there'll be a number. So the first one I would say is around carbon. So I definitely see the carbon market. So when I talk about carbon market, it's mainly carbon credits in order to assist companies to offset and to be able to reach net zero targets. I think that is just accelerating at a massive pace. Last year, the global market was valued at just over 900 billion. And I think in this region, being so fossil fuel dependent and not being able to transition away anytime soon, I think that the carbon offset, carbon credit market is going to be the pathway forward for many companies in order to achieve those sort of goals. A second trend that I've seen increasingly, and in particular since COP28, because it was also mentioned in the statement of outcomes, is circular economy. So moving away from linear models of consumption, where we extract, we use, and we throw away, trying to keep products and services in the economy for as long as possible. And I definitely see governments looking at this and trying to see how they can capitalize on that way. And it really is changing a mindset and a way of thinking of how you live your life, how you do business. I think that's very positive. And a third trend, which I think the Middle East and in particular UAE and Dubai is so well placed to lead the charge, is the whole center of sustainable finance. So in terms of financing the net zero transition, in terms of financing the sustainable development goals, to achieve the SDGs by 2030, it's estimated it needs to 3 to 5 trillion a year. They're huge numbers, and that cannot come from governments alone. The private sector needs to be involved. And for the private sector to need to be involved, we have to start lowering the risk rating around a lot of these projects. And we have to start making green finance options more readily available with a faster route to market. So when I talk about that, it links a little bit to carbon credits, actually, which are essentially a financial financial instrument that you can trade, but also things like green loans. A lot of the local Emirati banks, which is such a positive development, are offering green loans now, and also green bonds that can be offered by government. Egypt has issued a green bond, for example.
Sorry, so when you say green loan, do you mean a loan in order to invest in a project which is for the environment?
It can be either or. It can be either that the funds are used in order to get the financing, because a lot of the green investment projects, especially when we talk about renewables, are extremely capital intensive. And often it takes a very long lead time to be able to get some of that investment back. So I would say it would be that, and it would also be favourable lending terms. So essentially, by investing in green investments and by having these sorts of initiatives and projects across your business, that you can essentially benefit from lower terms of lending.
So we touched upon briefly, looking at the future of hiring tax professionals with an ESG understanding, but looking at sustainability and ESG alone, do you think there is a need for talent in this space, in this part of the world? I think in Europe and the US, there is more availability of candidates with this background, but in the Middle East, do you feel that we will need more talent around this area?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, definitely, yes, I would say. And what I would probably say is not to make it too formulaic. And what I mean by that is, take my background. I'm essentially a tax policy person, a bit of tax technology thrown in there. And now I operationalize sustainability across Middle East, North Africa for our tax practice. And I guess the message is, if you have a willingness to learn, if you really truly embrace the concept, if you see the value, the future, the opportunity in it. And essentially for us, we're a people business. So it's all about helping and bringing true value to our clients. And I really feel sustainability is a way to do that. So when I'm looking at different candidates who want to get involved, first and foremost, I need that willingness and that passion. And second, I would say teaming is so important. As mentioned earlier, it's very much a cross-service line offering in EY. That's how it operates. And equally within our clients, it's very multifunctional, multi-stakeholder. So I think having a teamwork ethic and attitude is extremely important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just to echo on that, really, if I were to think about it, in a non-consulting environment, the teamwork aspect is very important. When you're going out and trying to get that data, you need to be able to create those relationships and be able to extract the data that you require. And just being passionate about this topic is also important, because it's a very number crunching kind of process, kind of a role. Especially at the, say, junior kind of level. And so you really have to be very passionate about this topic to actually want to get into it.
Okay. And where do you see this talent already existing? Is it from Europe, or are there other parts of the world that you think these roles have been around for a bit longer that maybe we could be looking at in the future to bring this talent into this part of the world from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe the talent question mirrors a little bit the tax landscape and the ESG landscape. So if we look at other regions or markets like the US, like Europe, there have been fully fledged tax systems, and even ESG has been around a little bit longer. So I would say on the maturity curve, they're probably at a bit of a different place than this region. But then I guess the question is, do we need to bring in people from overseas? And I would say no. I would say work with what you have. I think as echoed by Seema, the passion, the teamwork, the interest. Having to stay up with the regulatory developments is a huge job in itself, because there's changes, I would say, every week. But I definitely think there is the workforce here already with a strong tax knowledge. And if you want to get into ESG, I would say go for it.
I'm sure after this podcast, your LinkedIn messenger will be going crazy. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've got a few off-topic questions that I'm just going to throw in there. So you've both been living in Dubai for quite a while now. I think over 10 years for Seema and about 6-7 years for Mary. Is that right?
4.
4 years?
That's all.
I thought it was a bit longer than
That's
that.
all.
Okay. So what's the best thing about Dubai for you both individually?
I think a lot of it is just the comfort, the travel as well. You feel like you're so connected to a lot of the locations. Be it Europe, be it even going to Asia. Location wise, it's a great place, and I think just generally Dubai is just a great place to be. It's a nice mix of east and west and everything, really.
Yeah.
Agreed. I would say first and foremost for me, it's community. So I love the growth mindset that I see in every part of my life here in Dubai, even within the tax community. So I think, Seema, we met in my first year here in Dubai, and we meet up regularly through lots of different events. I haven't seen that paralleled in other countries, and I've worked in many different regions. So I love that on the professional side. And also I'm a huge sports person, and the sports community here is unparalleled in terms of facilities, in terms of different groups. I mean, no matter what you want to do, what day of the week there is a run or a meet up or a cycle or a swim somewhere, and that's really great to have that in your doorstep. We're so lucky.
Yeah, I agree. And any nice holiday destinations you've been on recently that you can share with our audience?
I'm just back actually 2 weeks ago from Oman.
Okay, nice.
So I went there for 4 days to open the Oman Sustainability Week. And I fell so much in love with Oman. I stayed for 2 weeks.
Really? And Seema, anywhere you've been recently that you can share with us?
I went to Turkey recently. That was really nice. Yeah.
Amazing. So thank you both for coming on the podcast. It's been really nice having you and sharing your insights into sustainability. And thanks.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you so much for having us, Pooja.
Thanks, Seema.